Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to our 2025 Career Night panel. I'm going to start with our territorial acknowledgement. So, although we are not all together in the same space today, I'm joining the meeting from my home near the university, where I've been honored to grow up on the lands of the Lekwungen people. And I acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, today known as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I welcome you all and I thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives to be here. My name is Emma Atwell, and I'm a second year political science major and the undergraduate of political science course union director of student affairs. So the way our meeting is going to go today is we are going to have a quick round of intros from our panelists, then about 50 minutes of structured questions, maybe a little bit less today, and if possible, some Q&A, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. So maybe we'll start with Susan. Do you want to give like a quick spiel about your work and who you are?
Sure. Susan Kim, City of Victoria counselor, she, they, and my Korean name is Kim Sujan, and uh, what do I do? That's a great question. Every day is different, and I feel like rather than introduce that, we'll just unpack it over the course of our time together, and I'll pass it over to Michael next.
Hi, Susan. Thank you. So my name is Michael McDonald. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently based in Vancouver on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I have an undergraduate and a master's from UVic Political Science, so it's really great to be here with you folks. And yeah, I currently practice as a lawyer, the Ministry of Attorney General in litigation in our Vancouver group. Chris, do you want to take it over?
Sure. You can hear me okay? All right, cool. My volume sometimes goes a little weird. So hi, I'm Christopher Gillespie. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Corporate Privacy Officer and Director of Privacy and Access at the University of Victoria. So my team oversees the data risk management practices of the university and looks into all of the technology and make sure that it complies with the Freedom of Information Protection Privacy Act. And then we also are responsible for the access to information side. So anytime anyone makes a Freedom of Information request, we have to gather the records and do the redactions and send all of it out. So, and I'll pass it over to Aja.
Hi, everyone. I'm also on the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I recently completed the BC Legislative Internship Program, and I continue to work at the Legislative Assembly. Prior to my internship and working at the Legislative Assembly, I worked in housing policy research for the Community Social Planning Council of Greater Victoria. And then I also went to UVic for my undergrad in political science, where I did research on democratic decline in Hungary and the European Union's responses. And I will pass to back to Emma, it looks like.
Perfect. Thank you guys all so much. So we will start off with our questions. So the first question is about the BC Legislative Internship Program. And so it's mostly directed towards Michael and Aja. Chris, I think she's still in the call. She's actually in it right now. So she probably will also have some thoughts to contribute. But the question is, what were your biggest takeaways from the B clip? And how has the program influenced your current career? Do either of you want to start us off with that? You can take a second to think if you like.
I'll just jump in and
Yeah.
say, so I was a legislative intern in 2016. It's a great program. I always recommend it to folks nearing the end of their undergraduate programs, since you do have to apply a year ahead of time. So I think it's January of this year, the applications would have closed for the January intake of next year. But I think as we're up to 12 interns now. Is that right? So
12.
my year we were still 10, and then now it's 12 because there's at least one additional third party, but we'll see what happens in light of some recent developments there. But I had a phenomenal experience. I've yet to meet anyone who has had anything but a phenomenal experience in the program. It gives you an opportunity to experience the BC Public Service and the important work that gets done there. You have a chance to have a ministry placement for it's about a month that you're in a ministry. That was my introduction to the BC Public Service back in 2016. And then I spent 3.5 months with then opposition caucus, the BC NDP. They are now, of course, government caucus. But it was a really interesting exposure to see the work of opposition, the chance to work on estimates for the ministries of health and education. So those were it's really interesting to kind of dig deep into the numbers that are apportioned to ministries and look for differences and pull out intricacies that the opposition spokespeople could ask of the government ministers in the House. One thing that really surprises me now, obviously being a BC public servant and working with the Ministry of Attorney General, just how many people I come across, whether I'm dealing with clients or whether I'm dealing with other lawyers, who have had experience or have encountered somewhat the BC Legislative Internship, either as a ministry mentor or being an intern themselves. And I think we just had our 50th anniversary of the program, and it was lovely to see so many folks going back to 1976. First year of the program was George Abbott, who of course was Minister of Everything in the previous government, and has now written a PhD thesis with Dr. Colin Bennett, now retired from UVic Political Science. So really an incredible program and so much good to say. Plus the director, Karen Aiken, is absolutely amazing. So turn it over to some other interns.
I'll just jump on to what Michael was saying, and I think you did a great job explaining the program. I think my biggest takeaways are just kind of how all these different layers of our society come together and intersect with the public service and with the legislative assembly and the political processes that happen there. I think the biggest takeaway is just experiential learning of how that all comes together. I think it's hard to conceptualize until you have the opportunity to be an intern or to be in those spaces to really understand how it comes together. And so I think it's a really phenomenal opportunity to learn firsthand. And also, like I think Michael said, and I think people put in the chat, interns are everywhere. So another big takeaway is just how many interesting and amazing people there are working in areas they're passionate in. And also, I think the opportunities to truly connect with people that are interested in the same kinds of careers as you, are passionate about the same kinds of things. And that's a great element of the internship is the networking and introducing you to people. But I think it's a real, like, true opportunity to network in the sense that it's really, really strong connections and really helpful insights beyond just growing your LinkedIn or how many people you've met. So, and then in terms of how it's influenced my current career, post working throughout my degree in research and policy, I was really interested in working at the Legislative Assembly, working in the public service. So I think it really helped me to understand maybe how I can organize my career moving forward. It was very, very helpful. And also, I, like Michael, did a placement. Mine was with the Office of the Auditor General, which is a statutory office. And I think that's new since your year, Michael, right? The addition of statutory offices.
Yeah, I mean the offices existed, but you couldn't be placed with
Mhm.
them. They just came in and spoke to us. It's great that they now have the independent offices as a placement option.
So that was definitely a highlight for me beyond the caucus placement, just being able to understand a statutory office, its relationship to the Legislative Assembly, and how that office, I was with the performance audits team, works with government in evaluating government's own aims. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. That is super insightful for poli sci students. And I'm definitely considering the program myself, so I really appreciate it. Chris, is there anything you want to add about like your current experience?
I can touch on my current experience a little bit. So in terms of my ministry placement, I worked for emergency management and climate readiness, EMCR. I was on their policy and legislation team, mostly working on the new regulations that came out of the Emergency Disaster Management Act. So that was really, really interesting and really valuable. And it was really cool to kind of get to put in practice the policy writing skills that I practiced in my undergrad. There is such a massive difference between the policy briefs you'll write in Poly 351 and the ones you'll write in the real world. So that was really cool. And then for my government or for my caucus placement, I've placed in the government caucus with the BC NDP. And that's been really interesting. We're doing a lot of speech writing and that kind of thing, and also just some other research and communication tasks. But overall, I would say I've just really been soaking up the experience, and I would really encourage anyone who has any sort of even a minor interest in BC politics or democracy, honestly, to take part in the program. I think just the insider view that you get into the legislative process and how a democratic institution functions on a very real day-to-day level is just so fascinating. And yeah, I'd happy to chat in the future if you're looking on to apply. So yeah.
Thank you all so much. That is fantastic. So now I'm going to invite more of our other panelists to join the conversation because, they weren't part of that. So we're going to talk about further education. I would love to know what work experience or further education did you find valuable after securing your bachelor's degree to get where you are today? So if there's anyone who feels they wish to speak first, feel free. The floor is yours. Susan's thinking. Christopher, Chris, go for it.
I can jump in. So I was fortunate enough to be in a co-op program right before I graduated, which is one of the only reasons I didn't do the internship program. It's an amazing program, and I've seen a lot of great people come out of it. I took some time after my degree while I was working in the BC Public Service, and then completed a master's in public administration through the Royal Military College, which is I would liken it to being an MBA for government. So if you're interested in moving up in government, an MPA is a great way to go. And one of the advantages is once you get a master's program, you get more credit when you're in the interview process with BC government, just because of the way their grading grids work. And then I sort of just got stuck well, not stuck. I enjoy what I do, but I got stuck in my privacy box and have been working in that since I graduated. And so when COVID hit, and I realized I couldn't travel anymore, I decided it'd be a good idea to do a Master's of Law. So I did that as my COVID project. And that's been really valuable just for Michael, close your ears, tricking lawyers who assume that I have a JD, even though I don't, just because I have LLM. But it's also a really great foundational piece for understanding the academics of law, how the law works, getting a deeper dive into the law if you haven't gone to law school. So I found that to be quite a valuable experience.
Thank you so much. That is quite a fantastic COVID project to go get. I just got into gardening. So to get a master's of law is pretty fantastic. Pretty cool. Is there anyone else who'd like to contribute to this? If I can also restate what the question is. Susan, I see your mic's off.
Yeah, I'll just jump right in. I assume the question that you were about to restate was what post-bachelor's degree experience helped. Okay. So I went back and got a second bachelor's because my first bachelor's was useless. That's a lie. My first bachelor's was in sciences, and it was in environmental biology, and realizing how so much of the answer to climate catastrophe is in the political realm. I actually realized I needed to go back to school and understand what I was up against. And through that, similar to what we're hearing our co-panelists say, there was like co-op, there was getting involved in student politics. But I think beyond that, I think an understated thing that has helped me prepare for where I am today is working in nonprofit spaces, particularly as a swimming instructor at the YMCA in Ottawa, where you really get to meet like a huge range of people and demographics and income levels and family like types and orientations. And it gives you a flavor of what like how people are hurting out there, truthfully. And I think it's like a really big source of why I chose to take on work that works with people. Beyond just like the looking great on a resume, it's also just like the soft things that came with just living life and trying to pay my bills. Um, I'll open the floor to Aja or Michael from here.
think I would just add that when I was finishing my undergrad, I didn't know whether I wanted to do additional education. I was pretty burned out after an intense 4 year undergrad, and I knew I wanted to work in politics, so I went and did that. And then I just started to find myself missing academia. It can happen, believe it or not. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a law degree or a master's, and I had applied to the MPA program, the MA, and some law schools. And then I had a choice to make, and I ended up choosing the MA of political science at UVic over the MPA or the JD at that time, with a plan or an intent to do a JD after the MA. Um, and the reason I did the MA is because I really wanted to do that sort of deep dive research on an issue that I was passionate about. And so that's why I wrote my thesis on the government's apology to us LGBTQ communities. So it was an opportunity to do a lot of research, and as far as I know, it's the first research that was written on the government's apology, which was really exciting to be at that forefront of that space, and had the opportunity to work with Dr. Matt James, who's amazing and wonderful, and supervised my thesis, and interviewed the lawyer who was involved in the negotiating the $145 million class action settlement for survivors of the purge. The purge generally being the period, the 1950s to the early 1990s, of thousands of federal public servants who were fired for being gay, up until 1992, when Michelle Douglas was the last person dismissed from the Canadian military, and sued the military in federal court that brought an end to that practice. However, the associated period of redress and the demands for apology, those would start in sort of the late 90s, and then into 2016, 17, those demands actually coming together in both an apology and a class action settlement. And we are waiting, I think this year, the monument that will commemorate the purge will actually be unveiled in Ottawa. They've just unveiled a permanent exhibit at the Canadian Museum of Human Rights for survivors of the purge. And so that was a really phenomenal experience. And I also thought it was an excellent precursor to law school, because I had a chance to take a deep dive into the criminal law and look at how it had been used to systematically discriminate against 2S LGBTQ communities, but also the civil remedy for that discrimination being the class action settlement. So I really enjoyed that experience. And I will say to this day, like, I far more enjoyed my master's than I enjoyed law school, because law school is a bit of a slog, as I'm sure many of you have heard. Although I think I might enjoy an LLM one day, if MA is grad school at political science level is any indication. So yeah, I think the best advice that I could give there is just like, don't feel compelled that you have to immediately jump from undergrad into more school. I think it's really important to take, a year or two, three, and figure out what you want to do rather than just jumping into something because it's the next step. And a lot of us that, jumped from high school right into undergrad just did it because it was the next step. That's what you're supposed to do. So just don't be afraid to take that moment. You will go back when it's right for you.
Thank you so much. Before we conclude this conversation, Aja, is there anything you'd like to add? You don't have to.
I might just echo what Michael said. I think Susan said of just about, the value of beyond educational experience, professional experience and helping you understand where you want to go and how that you can get more educational experience. And like Michael said, I think it's great to remind people that you can always go back. And I think for me right now, I'm really enjoying learning more about the public service and public policy and areas I'm interested in. I'm also working as a research assistant for UVic. And so just learning, I guess, applied what I thought I'd be interested in and understanding how that's what it's like in practice for me. So I'm also hoping to go to law school, I think, on this point forward, just based off what I've learned from the internship, working at the Legislative Assembly and in public policy about how maybe that lands for me. So, yeah.
Susan,
Thanks. I my brain got sparked when Michael was speaking of I also just wanted to raise you don't have to go into further school right after. And part of the benefit of that is you get to learn what you don't want, which is arguably just as valuable. I graduated into a federally conservative time of Canada, and having a degree in environmental science, I was like, "Ooh, I'm so idealistic. I don't want to greenwash the tar sands. I can't find a job in Canada. Boo-hoo." So I actually went and taught English in Korea for a year, which came with its own set of super unpleasant experiences as a diaspora Korean, going back to the motherland. But that in itself also was so rewarding because, I got to teach kids who were orphaned or children of migrant workers in Korea. And that was sort of the beginning of my exposure to the story of globalization and imperialism in Korea that I've started to unpack. And so um, there were unexpected gems and lessons that I hold near and dear from the experience of basically being unemployable. I'll pass it back to Emma.
that is fantastic. I love all the personal anecdotes. It really makes it, and it gives a really interesting and like human, real understanding of each of you and your experiences. And it's very relatable, even at my age and my level of education and where I'm at. So I appreciate it. We're going to talk about some networking now, which, is a big part of being a professional out in the world. So my question is, do you have any advice of how to build your professional network? Anyone feel free to jump in. Floor is whoever's.
Maybe I'll just jump in as a recent graduate and also legislative intern. That I think, as I kind of spoke to earlier, I think the key thing is just authenticity and really connecting with people that you have common interests with, or reaching out to people that you are interested in their career and maybe sharing how your personal experience aligns. I know I heard on this panel maybe 5 years ago, and I attended as a student. I remember people saying, please don't say to me, I want to network with you. And I think they just were speaking about just the value of authenticity and genuine interest. And as a legislative intern, we would share with people, I have research in this area, or I'm interested in this area and I want to work here. And people would totally open up their schedule or their time or their experience. So I think just really focusing on what you bring to the connection or what you want to get out of it. Um, and then also, I just want to mention my friend Lauren, who was an intern last year. She's now in law school, and she heard someone on a panel that she really enjoyed listening to, and she looked them up on LinkedIn and sent them a message and said, I'm just so fascinated by what you have to say, and it really struck with me in these ways, and I would love to talk to you. And here's my resume if you're interested, just to see what I've been up to. And then Lauren now has an articling job this summer with that person because they really liked her resume and what she had to say in their coffee. So I think, yeah, it's great to have authentic interest and reach out.
That's a really cool anecdote. Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to add to the conversation?
I will say that the one thing I learned, and it is sort of a creature of going to law school, is that you're encouraged to reach out and chat with as many lawyers as possible. And that's advice that I tell everyone that's remotely interested in law or trying to figure out what areas of law they're interested in. I've yet to have a situation where I've emailed a lawyer, and this goes from right before I started law school, but especially when you're in law school, and then to today, lawyers are happy to meet and share their experiences with other folks that are in the legal profession and with students that are looking to find their path. And there's lots of organizations that do a really good job in facilitating these connections. As a first generation law student, there's something called the First Generation Network. And you have the opportunity to get involved with them, and they'll connect you with a first generation lawyer, and they'll pair you up when you're in law school. I think this is really important because when you're coming to law school and you don't have that background in your community where, a parent or a close family member is a lawyer, there's a lot about the profession that is sort of just assumed knowledge, but it certainly is not knowledge that most of us have when we don't have that familial exposure to law. And so the First Generation Network does a great job in building those connections with other first generation lawyers. I really encourage folks to look into that when they're in law school. And then just keep an open mind. I think that sometimes when we think about, formal recruitment and getting jobs, such a heavy emphasis on the big law firms, the national law firms, and they do incredible outreach work. To all sorts of communities. But at that same point, sometimes they just have the ability to have their voice in law schools a lot more than other law firms. So I think what you'll find is when you reach out to, if you're interested in criminal defense, look at some criminal defense lawyers in town. If you want to practice in Victoria or Vancouver, email those lawyers. I guarantee you they'll be happy to sit down with you. So that also speaks to your point, Asia, about being authentic, right? You're not saying, "Hey, I want to meet you and network you, and I want a job." You're just simply saying, "Hey, I'd love to have a chance. I'm a first year law student, curious about criminal law. I'd love to have a chance to sit down and have a coffee." And you'll probably hear back.
Michael, I'm totally just gonna go 180 from where you went. Sorry. Which is for me and Aja arguably also what you're saying. For me it's like you're networking every day. Like you are networking when you are talking to the person who's handing you your coffee at the coffee shop. You're networking when you hold open the door for someone. We are embedded in networks of people in society, and for me, the question is framed in such a way that suggests there's a transactional nature to it when I don't believe that there is. I believe that ultimately the best networking, what you're really trying to do is leave an impression, right? And what's the best way to do that? Frankly, just be kind and be interesting. And what's the best way to do that is don't force it. Just be kind and interesting to everyone you meet. I take time to think of what could be interesting questions to ask people if I meet them for the first time. And so, Michael, when we first logged onto this panel, I was like, "Oh my gosh, you have a cat! Tell me about it!" Right? And if we didn't have to do this panel, I'd ask you more about Maine Coons because I've heard things about Maine Coons. Um, and so I think to me, in terms of tips for networking is it does go back to what Aja did say, which is be authentic. And to take that further is it also means that you don't have to try to remember what you said the next time you see someone, right? Like I am very upfront. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I don't remember your name, but I do remember that we talked about your trip to Hawaii because I asked what your favorite smell was. And so like having those interesting things can makes you more memorable without making it transactional. It's more relational. And so that networking goes from being utilitarian to like truly, I think, build a community. And that's what's going to serve you as we enter a more politically uncertain climate moving forward. Yeah. I cede the floor.
Thank you. That's fantastic. All of your advice is really valuable and I'm taking it to heart. All of it. The contrasting perspectives is really awesome too. So thank you.
Can
Okay.
I,
Yeah,
sorry, can I
please,
jump in?
please.
I would say don't overthink it and have fun. I think that's a big piece of it. I think there's a lot of assumption or get connections specifically with people or industries that you want to work with. And that's really not true. I One of the ways I network is I do a lot of volunteered on a lot of different types of patients in the social service sector and in libraries and that sort of thing. And you meet people and have really interesting experiences outside of your perspective. And I think that's really, to Susan's point, you're building that community and that it doesn't have to be transactional, but you do still um, gain perspective of something that you wouldn't have thought about it before, or you might gain experience in something that you will not realize was valuable for 10 to 15 years. But I've definitely had work experiences, and then 15 years later, I'm like, holy crap, I'm using this thing from when I worked at McDonald's or when I worked in a call center. I never thought I would use this again, but it's super valuable in this moment. So try not to overthink it, just treasure every value you're having or every opportunity you're having to connect with people every day.
I'm just gonna like jump in with another anecdote, which is, believe it or not, dating apps killer networking, right? Like the freaking Bumble has their whole like BFF thing, and I've like some friends I know have met really good people through that app. And part of the reason I ran for office was because someone who I went on a couple dates with was like, I'm gonna run for office. And I was like, if you're running, I can run. So like, like the point being though, is you never know who you're gonna meet where and be open to that opportunity, even if it looks unconventional. Okay, I'm done.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, we're done with uh networking. We're gonna move to more like personal directed questions. Not too personal, I promise. But more just about like how it felt to be, entering the job market following your graduation. So, my first question is, does the job you have now line up with the vision you had in your undergrad? I'm shaking heads.
Not in the slightest. I actually intended to come back to UVic for a fifth year and go into academia and pursue my honors thesis around religion and society and secularization. And I had a personal health crisis and decided to go into the workforce rather than stay in academia, and just fell into what I'm now doing 13 years later.
Awesome. Um, Anyone else like to? I invite you to, even if it's short, share.
Um, sorry, can you restate
Yeah,
the question?
totally.
I'm really bad at that.
It's okay. Basically, does the job that you have now line up with the vision that you had for yourself during your undergrad?
Um, okay, so to buy my co-panelists time as they come up with much more elegant words, Yes and no. So when I was in my science degree, a lot of my peers were like very obviously like, I'm gonna go be a doctor. And a group of us would sit not in the front row and be like, okay, chill. Um, just like in my undergrad in poli sci in Ottawa, everyone's like, I'm gonna go be a politician or a lawyer. And then I'd be sitting back and being like, okay, chill. And here I am being the absolute biggest keener of all political science students I've ever met. And like it wasn't intentional though. I was actually at UVic doing graduate studies in the CSPT program, political science, when I had a personal health crisis come up as well, and it extended my period of studies. And I was like, I can't afford to freaking live in this freaking city, so I need a freaking job. And I wound up getting a job working as a political aide, and then I decided to quit grad school. So why would I keep paying for a piece of paper that anyway, so in short, my answer to your question is no, I am not where I envisioned I would be. I'm where I feel a lot of my peers envisioned they would be. And it was fully driven by a need to pay for rent at first.
That's very realistic, and I really appreciate that. Cool. Okay, Aja, Michael. Aja, I know you're like haven't been in the workforce as long, but still. But yeah, either of you.
Michael, do you want to go ahead and then I can maybe just add a final?
Um, yeah, sure. No, I was just saying, like, I didn't think that I was going to go to law school. It wasn't like something that throughout my entire undergrad, I was like, I want to be a lawyer. Like, that's what it was something that definitely just, as someone that was like very involved in politics and continues to be in different ways now than I used to be. I think that I saw politics as this way to make direct change. And so for me, being involved in like traditional party politics was a way of agitating for causes that you believe in. But that said, I think, the strict confines of partisanship that we find ourselves in, and as we now are becoming more and more siloed in our respective camps because of some of the awful things going on to the south of us. Um, I think that somewhere along the way there was this realization that I wanted a different skill set to help bring about change, and that skill set that seemed most applicable to me was law. And so now I have acquired those skills, and I'm very happy with the work that I get to do every day. But that said, I would never have expected that I would be a lawyer or let alone a lawyer in public service when I was an undergrad. My focus was really just getting involved in politics and working in politics and trying to make change that way, which I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do that in a formal sense, and now continue to be involved in politics and in a volunteer sort of aspect. But that said, I think that um, becoming a lawyer, and I've actually chatted with like a lot of people about this. Like there's a lot of people in law school that have known they want to be lawyers since they watched like The Good Wife or Suits, and they're like, I want to do that. And then there's a whole bunch of people that come into it a bit later, after some other careers. I had friends in law school who had masters and PhDs or were engineers or accountants or had wholly different like life stories, some that were musicians and had transferred over to law. So I feel like that was one thing that I really appreciated about law school was just the diversity of the class itself and how many people go into it at a later point in life after having all sorts of experience. But I think it makes everyone better at being a lawyer when you come at it from your own lived experiences. So just be open to changes and things happen. And I continue to be open. I don't know where I'll be practicing law down the road or whether I'll still be practicing law. There's still lots of open questions, but I just try to be open to that.
I think I'll just add that I think where I am right now lines up with where I thought I would be, which was I thought I would just be kind of figuring out different avenues I was interested in. When I started my undergrad, I thought I was gonna go to law school and become a lawyer. And then during my undergrad, I really fell in love with kind of the more public policy side of things, or, I have a really strong background in the community side of things, but I think overall, especially for recent graduates, I think early on it's just great to be dipping your toes in different arenas and learning different things. And maybe just to touch on what Susan was talking about earlier, I've also had a lot of really great success. I think Christopher spoke to this too, in volunteering, and how that's also maybe something I wasn't expecting to be doing so much of right now, but that's been something really fulfilling that I did in my undergrad and I'm still doing. And I think it's a great way to expand your professional opportunities. And right now I'm volunteering alongside the legal system, and I think that's been a really great opportunity to learn more about maybe where I want to go. So that's my answer.
Amazing. Thank you all. It's a little bit of like a funky question, but I really appreciate all your answers. My mom's just walking into the house, so you're going to hear her in the background. So, my next question for you all is what is one lesson that you have learned since starting your career that you wish you knew at the beginning? Also, definitely making you think.
Maybe I'll just jump in with an easy one, which is I think politics and government and Victoria and all these things, it's a smaller town, I think, than people realize. And I think, like Susan was saying, in terms of when you go to the coffee shop or different ways you show up in the community, I think that really matters. And I think that's really important for your career and your personal well-being. So I think I wish I realized just maybe you're on a good path if you're showing up in your community in the ways you wanted to. And also, I think I've realized in recent years it's really easy to criticize government or policy or your job or what have you. And I think I've really learned the value of really critically engaging with things. I think some of the people I know that are the happiest are people that look on the bright side career wise, or make sure they're always treating people well. And just to clarify, it's feel free to be critical of lots of things that are deserving of being critical. I just think I maybe come from more of the protest camp or advocacy camp, and I think I've learned the value of sometimes things are things have been thought through really well, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I guess I'm just trying to say the value of uh maybe just treating everyone really well and learning.
For sure. Do any of our other panelists have thoughts, feelings?
Um, I have two, and I'll try and make it quick. Um, the first one, I think I'll say, and this is not to scare anyone, but you will have to relearn how you write. When you get into the real world, you do not write papers like you write papers, and decision makers do not care about your sources. They just care that you have the right information for them to make a decision. So you will end up with a completely different, you will have a totally different mindset around writing that you will have to learn when you get into the professional workforce. The second one I think is I got told this very early in my career, and it was something that I had to learn the hard way, which is don't chase money. Find what drives you, find what you love. I learned, so I spent 8 years in the public service, and then moved into the private sector and went to TELUS for 4 years. And over those 4 very painful years, I learned what golden handcuffs are. And I learned that the profit motive of a stakeholder really doesn't drive me to do my best work. And so, if you find yourself in a place where, you're able to live comfortably for what the standard is for you, and you really love what it is that you do, I would encourage you to really think, do you need to follow that TikTok lifestyle, or that, pursue, you know, obscene amounts of wealth? Or are you happy making change in the world, doing what it is that you love? Because living a happy day is much better than coming home and just feeling completely mentally drained and unable to function as a human being.
I'm gonna build on what you're saying, Christopher. There are days when I come home and I look at my partner and I'm like, this happened. Don't talk to me. I'm gonna go like get stoned on weed now because this day sucked. And then there are other days where I just like go to bed with a smile on my face. I'm like, today was so cool. But a lot of that, and it's a job that's very like up and down. And so what I've come to learn is I treasure my heart and my health like n never before in my life. I This job has given me the worst depression I've ever experienced, to the point where I've had hair fall out. But also, I have gotten so much more into running and into poetry and into art, because the extremes of the experience have forced me to really look inward into like what is the consistent core of who I am that I can come back to. And that is functionally like, listen, Susan, if you physically can't get out of bed because your shoulder hurts too much because you haven't been lifting a freaking dumbbell in weeks, like maybe you should think about that. Like, I know it's so trite to be like, health comes first, but like actually though.
Thank you. That's
Yeah, I would add to that too. Like as someone with anxiety, I feel like one of the things that like really sparks my anxiety is feeling like I'm trapped somewhere in a particular position or job or situation in life. And I think one thing that I've worked really hard to try to cultivate is this perception that, you're never really trapped. There's always other options available. You have to have the ability to have confidence in yourself. And while it is often very hard sometimes to find the confidence to make big life changes, I find that I'm like slowly getting better at that because I can, when imposter syndrome rears its head and says, hey, folks from your background, aren't ever in this position, or you have so much student debt to pay off, so you have to continue to like practice law for the rest of your life. It's like, okay, well, that's not realistic or helpful. I will continue to do things that make me happy. And if I'm not feeling happy in a position, I will look for a way to pivot out of that. And that's something that, so I looked at the Court of Appeal, and one of the judges I met there, who's now retired and is absolutely lovely, shared her like three axioms of wisdom with me. And I get the sense she shares this with a lot of people. So she said, find something to fill your heart, find something to fill your mind, and protect your health because it's all you have. And that's what she lives on. Is if you can find something you're interested in, that'll fill your mind. You can find something to fill your heart, whether it's your public service, it's a partner, it's a combination of, your beloved animals. And then prioritizing both physical and mental health at all points. And nothing is worth compromising on the health piece. So it is something that I'm trying to move forward, and just have confidence in my abilities and look at what I have done in the past to solidify to say, you know what, this is scary, but I can make this change in my life.
I am of course gonna jump in again. I just can't help it. All of you have such good like gleanings for me. But Michael, what you're saying about big changes. I remember when I was younger and like a big change was like, oh my gosh, what doors am I closing on my future? Um, and it's paralyzing because that in itself is its own form of anxiety, because you are, as undergrad students making decisions, where you don't know what doors you are going to be opening down the road or closing inadvertently. But that comes back actually to the question that was quite brilliantly posed about networking. And I found that when big changes in my life have happened, either willingly or unwillingly, it's been the network of people who have kept me afloat during that tumult. And it admittedly does get easier as you get older and as you and your friends get a little older and you're more in the workforce and you've built up a little bit of savings. Haha. Or like have disposable income, right? It does become easier for your network to come out and support in different ways. And I've noticed that in the last couple of years. But as those life changes happen, and the thing is, it doesn't even have to be employment life changes. Like it can be like you're going through a divorce or you are having a big change in how you identify. And this is where you need to fall back on that community that you've built, as well as that the ways that you filled your heart and your head and kept your health intact. Um, okay. I, I'm out. Too much talking.
Okay, I can move on to our next question. I believe all of our panelists have contributed and we've had some really excellent insights. And actually, what we've been talking about is a pretty good lead into our last question of our structured panel time, which is how do you address the anxiety of not having relevant job, or how did you address the anxiety of not having relevant job experience when you were searching for your first job post grad? Because a lot of the time, careers these days are looking for experienced people when they are recruiting. Or not, but that's kind of the idea, the general kind of feeling when you're looking for work.
Maybe I'll just jump in again at first and just say that I always think of anxiety personally as an opportunity. Maybe it's bringing my attention to something I'm lacking or an opportunity to grow my skill set. And I had a coach once tell me anxiety is an evolutionary, it's something we've developed. It has to have some type of advantage for us. And so I've kind of taken that to more just treat it as a like a alarm system or an early warning system. And so in turn, if I'm feeling anxious about a lack of experience, I think I try to turn that into where I can grow that. I think UVic has so many amazing volunteer opportunities, honors, or co-ops, or different things. So I think there's so many opportunities to grow your experience. But I think it's also a really hard job market right now for young grads. And I think, like everyone was saying earlier, just being easier on yourself, maybe emotionally or with how you're doing, because it's really easy to think you have to have like be at the top of the mountain today. But I think life is just the journey of going up the mountain and then going down the mountain and around the mountain and yeah, so those are my quick thoughts.
I think there's two things. The first is set some level of realistic expectation for yourself. You're not necessarily like, unless you're excruciatingly well connected, it is unlikely that you're going to walk out of a bachelor's degree into a C-suite executive role and be making $250,000 a year and wearing a Rolex. Like it's not realistic. So I think when you're job hunting, there has to be a certain level of appreciation that this may not be where you want to be right now, but it's a stepping stone to where you may want to be in the future, and being willing to accept that lower level position. I have many friends who have started as clerk nines, clerk 11s, clerk 14s in the BC Public Service. They get a year or two of experience, and then they're, AO 21, AO 24, they're moving, they're using their bachelor's degrees and able to move up in the public service. So I think that's the first one is set a realistic expectation for yourself. And the second one is you're probably more qualified than you think you are. And if you have the opportunity to, take advantage of the career services at UVic or speak to someone who knows how to craft resumes and is able to, or sit down with someone in the industry and talk through your experience. Again, I've done this for for people in the past where we just talk about what experiences they have. And I'm like, that's great. You should note that down. You know, this is this type of a transferable skill. Emma, what you're doing right now, transferable skill. It's a great skill to have to be able to moderate a panel. And so just being aware that it may not be obvious to you. And so take advantage of some of those other services to speak to other people to help build your resume into the diamond that it deserves to be.
Wonderful. That's fantastic advice. I appreciate it. Michael or Susan, Susan looks lost in thought. Um, if you have anything to contribute, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has said some really important and good advice. The one thing I heard a long time ago was like, don't self-select yourself out of opportunities. And I think that's something that, like, particularly when you're thinking about BC Legislative Internship Program or when I was applying for a clerkship at the Court of Appeal, I was like, I don't know, like, is this really what I want to do? I'm sure there's like law students that, are more aligned or more what they're like looking for. And then I put my hand up for it. I was like, well, we'll see what happens. And then, yeah, I had an incredible experience working with one of the kindest and most amazing judges, who's also now retired. And he and I continue to be really close and have like an excellent mentorship relationship. None of that would have happened if I had decided not to put my hand up for that position. And it was really remarkable. So don't don't not apply for something because you think that you aren't qualified. Because as Chris said, you are probably more qualified than you think you are. And yeah, don't be afraid of rejection because even if you are experiencing rejection and you're not being the one chosen, you might make a positive impact. I've had situations where I've applied for something, and the feedback I get is like, "Hey, you're not qualified for this, but we have this other position we think that you might be interested in," and that turns out to be a stepping stone to something else. So generally apply for all sorts of things, even if you think that it's not something you're immediately interested in.
I was just going to add to that and say that what you were saying reminded me of how I think a lot of people don't get something they applied for and think that they're not smart enough or that they shouldn't apply again or they should change their life trajectory. And I think some of the most successful people I know are just submitting a lot of applications or trying again or talking to people that were successful when they weren't. And so I think, like Michael said, don't count yourself out or don't count yourself down. Just keep trying. Life is, I think, the journey of just keeping and trying.
I beyond what all of my co-panelists have wisely contributed, I want to add I had a roommate who was doing his PhD at UVic in political science a while back, and his mentor, Professor Bill Carroll in sociology, said, "It's okay, bread comes first. It's okay that you have to take a shite job if you need to feed yourself. That in itself is a valuable experience in terms of life experience and makes you a better person in terms of relating to the world around you. I have no shame whatsoever about going against my dear mother's wishes, who was so pissed I went into retail, but I needed to pay rent, right? And so I went and sold shoes for a corporate company who I really disliked. Turns out learning to read a pay stub was a skill that I was able to pass on to my fellow coworkers at Sophomore who were high schoolers and didn't know like basic labor laws that they were entitled to breaks. So like there is an opportunity in every single job, whether or not you like it. It's okay, bread comes first. And also, there's gonna be like unexpected gleanings, right? Because now I know how like retail supply chains work, which turned out to be really great when I'm thinking about City of Victoria procurement. And it turns out I'm really good at small talk after talking to people about why Crocs are the better shoe for them instead of Clarks. Like if I can make hay out of that, like talking about why people's taxes should go up is like a little easier, actually. I'll pass it back to you, Emma.
Thank you. That is awesome. Thank you all so much for your contributions and for answering all of my questions. I know I've really made you think, but you've all had such wonderful and insightful things to say, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here. I will open the floor for any questions that we have for our from our attendees. I will think of some questions myself as well. I've been like just soaking it all in, but now I have to decide like what else do I want to know? Chris is gonna start us off.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for all your insights. Everything that everyone has been saying has been so valuable. Especially for me is thinking it's just being super early in my career, I guess. And yeah, I've just really appreciated everyone so far. My question, and kind of relates to Susan, what you were saying about um like working jobs that you don't necessarily think are like valuable to your greater career goals. What are some of the jobs that you folks have had that, yeah, like don't really relate to what you're doing at all now, but like you still learn something really valuable from? Susan, you mentioned that you taught in Korea. I'd love to hear more about that. That sounds really interesting. So yeah, just open to anyone.
If it's okay, I'm just gonna answer, build off that, and then peel out. Of course, I have to get the last word in. So I taught English in Korea for a year through a public program put on by the government of Korea, looking for anyone who was currently in an undergrad or had recently graduated. So I think this program might still be in existence. And it was intentionally to send I hate saying this, native English speakers to rural parts of Korea where there is a scarcity of English instruction. Um, it was the beginning of my understanding why I felt like a fish out of water in Korea. It was the beginning of understanding why I was being shamed for not knowing my mother tongue better. It was the beginning of understanding why university professors who I was meeting in Korea were like, oh, but you can speak other languages, you're fine. But then folks on the street were like, you can't even speak Korean, we don't want to do, and so it's like, it comes back to what I was saying of you never know what experiences you're going to get and how they mark your not just your personal career trajectory, but also your own intellectual trajectory moving into the future. And as a result of that experience, I've started to unpack like histories of imperialism in Korea and what does that mean for me as an elected representative who's the only non-white person on council. And there's so many intricacies that have come simply through being in a job I did not want to be in. So it's a great question, but also a really good reminder to take the lessons where they are, even if they don't reveal themselves to you right away. And also, sometimes there are no lessons, and that's okay too. That in itself is a lesson. Um, yeah, I'm gonna put Michael on the spot because I'm really curious about that answer too for Michael.
Thanks, Susan. Sorry, I think I'm going to need a question to be reiterated.
Oh yeah, the question was just like, what are jobs that you've worked that like maybe totally don't relate to what you're doing now, but still taught you some really important lessons?
Oh yeah. I mean, two come to mind when I was an undergrad because I needed to pay my rent and the Canada Student Loans Program, even back in 2011 to 2015, was not sufficient to pay rent and tuition, let alone now, given that there hasn't been a huge upscale in that. Um, I I worked as a host at White Spot, which was like really great for learning how to like interact with people. And I'm naturally extroverted, so I really loved that job. And then I moved over to Bell Mobility and I sold cell phones. And that was like a great experience in terms of A, asking people questions to identify their needs, and then B, recommending a product that would actually fit their needs and tailoring that to their specific situation. So that continues to be incredibly helpful. But more than anything, I spent on and off, but essentially 5 years working with BC Ferries in the customer service center, the call center. And I started just like taking phone calls from folks, and it could be anything from someone booking a reservation or someone coming to Victoria for the first time from Europe. But a lot of times it was people angry that they'd missed a check-in time, or it was someone that was really upset about that. And they would scream at you on the phone. And it was, it's actually a really good experience because you realize how ridiculous this whole situation is, and how I could not ever imagine like expending that much energy to scream at someone about something that's totally not in their control. But it also gave me a ton of experience with like talking someone down from like a very high uh, point of conflict, and different techniques that you can use with your voice and stuff that we were trained on. And then I did social media management with BC Ferries. So I got to run their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which is really cool. And then key accounts, just like the bus companies and film companies and commercial companies. And then finally, for the last 2 years or so, I was the customer service supervisor. So I had a team of like 30 people under me, which is like all the call center agents and everything. And I was doing that actually part time while I was doing my master's. And it was a really great experience because I got to deal with the most like severely escalated calls. I got to support and help junior agents deal with these sort of calls. And all of these skills that I learned in that environment, I continue to use every day as a lawyer, because in litigation, sometimes people are not too pleased. And it is very useful to know how to kind of meet someone where they're at, and then um, talk them down from a specifically a position that does not appear to be a logical one to have. So I think that's something that I reflect on all the time, and I think that the opportunity to work with people was really great. Being in a leadership role as a customer service supervisor is really useful when you are naturally, as a lawyer, often in a leadership role when it comes to professional staff, be them legal assistants or paralegals. And when I was applied for law school or interviews in law school, most firms that I was applying for weren't asking about the BC legislative internship. They were asking about my time with BC Ferries because they felt that that was far more applicable to the law because it meant de-escalating situations. So I found that to be really, really interesting, that sometimes the things that you think are appealing, they might be appealing to get you in the door, but the kind of questions that you're going to get in the interview might not be the things that you think you're going to get asked about on your resume.
That's that's really interesting you say that, Michael. I have some similar experiences like that where so I spent quite a bit of my undergrad as an elected student official. And I still to this day use some of the conflicts that I had to deal with as an elected student official on the interview question. Tell me about a time that you had to deal with a difficult person. So, um, I
Yeah,
guess
huge shout out to everyone that puts their hand up to run for student government because it really is a thankless.
It's the next level
Yeah.
politics. Like, Christopher, you did something I could never.
so I guess I had a job. I didn't go directly from high school into undergraduate studies. I actually graduated high school and said I never wanted to touch a textbook ever again, which is hilarious when you look at my education now. Um, and I actually spent 3 years working in a call center that served the American cell phone population. So that was a very interesting experience, particularly when we served Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina. And just the level of anger that you have to deal with on a daily basis. Um, so learning how to sort of regulate my own emotions when I had, people yelling at me about things that I literally had no control over. But also learning how to take detailed notes and on a practical scale, learning how to actually read a bill has been super valuable. Um, I also my very first job, I actually was a custodian for a church. So learning how to regulate my own work environment, working alone for hours on end, and just control that experience. Fortunately, I was on a set schedule, so I had 6 hours to do my job, and I managed to eventually get it down to 4, so then I could go home early once I got it done. It's great. Um, yeah, those are the two that really stand out for me. I've also worked in fast food, I've worked in retail, all sorts of different things. And then even while I've been in my professional career, I did shifts with Elections BC and worked elections, which is super great experience for understanding how our democratic process actually works, how the independent election process differs from our neighbors down south. And just the project management skills that come with that. I eventually made my way up to being a district electoral supervisor with Elections BC, even though I was working full time, and just the project management and the HR planning and getting that full, you know, writ drop to ballot box perspective was super interesting.
Thank you. That is fantastic. Apparently, working in call centers is the place to be if you want to build resilience to conflict. So noted. Not sure if I'm ready to take that on because that is, wow, that sounds like a really hard job. So props to you both. Are there any other questions from any of our audience? I might have a question. Susan has headed out, so thank you to Susan. My question, maybe this will be our last question for today, is what kind of things did you do in your undergrad to set yourself up for your career, classes, extracurriculars? What have you, like looking back now, what have been the most valuable things you did? And I know that you've touched on this a little bit in various different questions, but yeah, I'd love to hear what you're thinking because that's where I'm at right now. So
Well, this actually comes around to how I know Michael. Uh, I spent 13 years volunteering with an organization called the University's Model Parliament. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to really exist all that much anymore, although I'd love to see it revitalized. Um, it was it was an opportunity for students from across to BC to come to the BC legislature and go through sort of the bill writing process and learn parliamentary debate and all those sorts of things. Unfortunately, it kind of died with COVID. But it was an amazing experience to be on their as a student member on their board and also to get that practical experience of what the legislative process looks like. Again, I was also in student government, so I'd worked a lot with like organizational design committees and finance committees, started to learn Robert's Rules of Order and how note taking or how to be a secretary for a committee and all those sorts of things. And then co-op. Honestly, co-op is probably one of the best things that you can do as an undergraduate student. I was also in UPS, a few
yes,
other things.
also
So
good to know. I'm glad to have you back. So, okay, awesome. Thank you. Do Aja or Michael have anything to add? Of course, if you don't, that's totally fine. I've asked a lot of questions today.
I think from my perspective, just exploring different things and pursuing what you enjoy. Um, And also, I'm really appreciative that I did an honors degree. I would definitely recommend anyone that's considering it to pursue that. I think it's really opened a lot of doors for me. It's given me, in terms of job experience, a lot of applicable job experience that I can share out of the gate. I had a research job, and then I became a research supervisor during my undergrad. So I just think it really provided me with amazing career experience, but it also provided me with lifelong friendships and a cohort of similarly interested people, kind of like the BC legislative internship, but before that with really amazing people. So I would definitely recommend honors. And I now still am working with UVic on a research contract. And again, that's totally directly related to my honors research. So that would be my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, I was campus president for a federal political party at UVic for like a year and a half. And considering that I still volunteer with that party today, I think that was a really helpful exposure to politics. So if you are at all inclined to partisan politics, don't be afraid to get exposure to it at the university level. It's a really good way to get to meet people in the party and get to network when you're fairly new to that particular domain. So that was something that was really beneficial. And then also just yeah, involvement with any sort of university model parliament. I was involved before that with BC Youth Parliament. And so it was like no surprise that I ended up as a legislative intern, considering how many times I'd been in that building through whatever capacity, whether it was University Model Parliament or BCYP before. So yeah, just look for opportunities. Great. Yeah, Chris, you did it too. I know there's so many people who got introduced to BC Parliament, often starting in high school, right? So that's really where they do great work. And we at that time we still had Chris. I don't know. Did they bring it back? Camp Phoenix, the camp that they used to run for like disadvantaged kids who can't afford to go to summer camp. That's a thing now again?
Yeah, that's still running.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so when I did it, they like weren't able to have like the physical camp for a little bit after that. Because it's expensive to run, but it's good to know that the organization is doing well. I see a question about setting boundaries at work and what ways you recommend going about. Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely you need to set boundaries at work. Certainly, as lawyers, that is something that we are encouraged to do because it is a profession where there's always more work to do. And if you don't set boundaries, you're just going to be working 12, 13-hour days every day, 7 days a week. So that's not encouraged anywhere. I would say it's probably easier to set boundaries in government practice because there's respect and recommendations for that. When I worked at one of the big national firms for a summer, there certainly uh, is a lot of work, and sometimes it's just an unreasonable ask. And so I admit that you might not feel comfortable doing it when you're quite junior, but if you don't do it, no one is going to do it for you. And so it's important to establish those boundaries early on and just simply one way I found is really helpful is if you've got someone asking you to take on an additional file or do some more work, just sort of setting the expectation, letting that other assigning lawyer know just what your current file load is, what sort of filing deadlines or court appearances you have upcoming. That will mean that you're not going to be able to make that deadline. And looking for alternatives. Is this something that we can have an article in student support on? Is this something that needs to be done tomorrow, or can this wait a week until I'm done with these two other things? But having open communication is really key there. So, not sure if other panelists have things to add on that question.
Want to go first, Christopher?
Sure. Yeah, I would say know your own self-worth. It's really easy to get swept up in I need money or I need to do this job. But if a workplace isn't respecting your boundaries, I would suggest looking for opportunities to find other opportunities. I had one job actually when I was in undergrad, and I showed up and they basically said, "Oh, we're a sandwich shop, so therefore we don't need to give you breaks." And I worked there for 2 weeks and left. So, don't be afraid to walk away from employers that are going to treat you like garbage, because they probably need you a lot more than you need them.
I was just going to add to, I think you can practice boundaries in lots of healthy and small ways, and it's probably easier to, place a boundary if you have smaller boundaries, or maybe verbalizing some of the things you're working on. For instance, saying, I'm really working on healthy work-life balance, and I think I'm always happy to help. But if I take this on capacity-wise, I know I'll be working quite late, and that's kind of against, the goal I'm working on for with like work-life boundaries. Sometimes that can help verbalizing it, or starting with small things. But like Christopher said, I think sometimes if you need to keep asserting boundaries that are really reasonable and really commonplace, and you're not feeling respected, or you're even seeing other people where you're not feeling comfortable how they're being treated, I think it's definitely, I think, worth considering other options, and leaving sooner than you might think. Like I think Michael was talking about earlier, feeling trapped. I think don't stay somewhere that you're not feeling respected, you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling heard. And there was another thing I was going to add on boundaries, um, which is, oh, I think that's another reason why I think it's really great to try to be positive and have positive working relations. So if you do need to let people know that you're uncomfortable, I think it sometimes can mean a lot more if you're known as really trying to have positive relations and really trying to be a team player, so that I think for me personally, I find it a lot easier to share when I need to set a boundary, because I work really hard to have positive relations.
That is fantastic, and that's a really good question. So thank you, Arshan, and thank you to our panelists for answering that. If we don't have any other further questions, we're pretty much at 7 o'clock now. So I think that we're gonna stop to end things. I'm gonna stop our recording.